Here's a truth that might make you uncomfortable. Sometimes, the most important journalism happens when we publish the voices we find most reprehensible. The media world is buzzing again about Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, but this time it's not about what you might expect. Critics who've been watching Bezos like hawks, convinced he's systematically destroying the Post's editorial independence to appease Donald Trump, found their latest evidence in an unlikely place, a Tuesday evening op-ed written by none other than Jeanine Pirro. For those unfamiliar with Pirro's background, she's the newly appointed U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., whose primary claim to fame, until recently, was hosting a talk show on Fox News where she practically worshipped at Trump's altar. Her latest piece defends the president's controversial decision to deploy National Guard troops throughout the nation's capital to combat what she describes as a dangerous crime surge, a crime wave that virtually every credible data source suggests simply doesn't exist. But here's where it gets controversial. Should respected newspapers like the Washington Post give platform space to officials whose arguments are built on questionable foundations? The social media backlash was swift and predictable. Subscribers threatened cancellations, critics pointed fingers, and the familiar chorus of Bezos is ruining journalism grew louder. Yet the real question isn't whether Pirro's perspective is palatable. It's whether publishing uncomfortable viewpoints from high-ranking government officials serves a legitimate journalistic purpose. Let's put this in perspective for anyone new to these media ethics debates. Newspapers have always faced a fundamental tension, balancing their responsibility to inform the public against their obligation to maintain editorial standards. When a sitting U.S. attorney submits an op-ed about policies affecting her jurisdiction, editors must weigh several competing factors. Pirro's credentials for her current role are admittedly thin. Beyond her decades-old experience as a prosecutor and judge, her most recent qualification was cheerleading for Trump on television. The Washington Post's own editorial board recognized this just 3 months ago when they criticized her appointment, highlighting her questionable judgment and noting that even her Fox News executive producer had once called her a reckless maniac while promoting conspiracy theories that eventually cost the network $787.5 million in libel settlements. And this is the part most people miss. The Post's editorial board, despite whatever compromises Bezos may have imposed, still had the backbone to oppose Pirro's appointment as recently as May. This suggests that publishing her op-ed wasn't necessarily an act of political submission, but rather a standard editorial decision made by Adam O'Neill, the new opinion editor. The parallels to the New York Times' Tom Cotton debacle from 2020 are impossible to ignore. Though the circumstances differ significantly, Cotton's op-ed advocating military force against Black Lives Matter protesters was far more inflammatory and factually problematic. The Times editorial team failed basic fact-checking standards, allowed unsubstantiated claims about Antifa involvement, and, most damaging of all, editorial page editor James Bennett admitted he hadn't even read the piece before publication. That level of negligence cost Bennett his job and damaged the Times' credibility. Pirro's piece, while undeniably problematic, reads more like standard conservative rhetoric about juvenile crime policy. She advocates for changing 3 specific D.C. laws to allow more aggressive prosecution of young offenders, arguing that young criminals have been emboldened to think they can get away with committing crime in this city. She calls for transferring juvenile cases to adult court for violent crimes, a position that's harsh and controversial, but not unprecedented in political discourse. Here's my uncomfortable truth. I believe the Washington Post made the right call in publishing Pirro's op-ed, despite finding her arguments reprehensible. Why? Because hiding inconvenient truths about what our government officials believe doesn't make those beliefs disappear. It just makes us less informed about the people making decisions that affect our lives. That said, the editorial standards could have been stronger. Any competent editor should have demanded that Pirro address the documented decline in D.C.'s crime rates, forcing her to explain why emergency measures are necessary when statistics suggest otherwise. Editorial pages must maintain truthfulness and accuracy standards, even for outside contributors whose views they find distasteful. The Washington Post, positioned in America's power center, has always served as a natural destination for government officials seeking to communicate policy positions. This isn't necessarily corruption, it's often essential journalism. We need to understand what our leaders are thinking, even when their thoughts disturb us. The real tragedy isn't that Pirro got her platform, it's that we're in a situation where such perspectives are coming from the nation's highest offices in the first place. The most effective way to prevent these troubling op-eds would have been preventing the administration that appointed her from taking power. But since that ship sailed long ago, our job now is to stay informed about what we're dealing with. So here's my question for you. Do you believe newspapers should provide platforms for government officials whose views you find morally objectionable? Is there value in understanding the mindset of people making policy decisions, even when those decisions seem fundamentally wrong? Or should editorial standards include refusing space to voices that promote what many consider harmful policies? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. Are we better served by engaging with uncomfortable viewpoints or by maintaining higher barriers to entry for our opinion pages? The comments section awaits your thoughts, and I suspect many of you will strongly disagree with my conclusion.